Now back to our top story. Jurors will resume deliberations in Lindsay Clancy's murder trial Friday morning. Judge William Sullivan instructed the jury to consider lesser charges of second-degree murder or manslaughter in addition to first-degree murder. They can also find Clancy not guilty or not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge says the jury can take into account the medical evidence presented throughout the trial. Take a listen.
In deciding whether the defendant intended to kill, intended to cause grievous bodily harm, or intended to do an act which in the circumstances known to the defendant, a reasonable person would have known created a plain and strong likelihood that death would result, you may consider any credible evidence that the defendant suffered from mental impairment or was affected by her consumption of prescription drugs.
Clancy admits to killing her 3 children, Cora, Dawson, and Kaylin, in their Massachusetts home in 2023, or Callan, excuse me. But the 36-year-old pleaded not guilty because she and her attorneys claim she was over-medicated and suffering from postpartum psychosis at the time. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, I know you've been busy all day on different programs within CBS streaming 24/7 talking about this because there's so much interest. As we mentioned, the judge now gave those instructions to the jury about considering a lesser second-degree murder charge or even manslaughter. What does that signal to you about this case in terms of how it was presented?
So it's a great question, and we should be clear that this is not out of the ordinary. It often happens that there is a lesser included charge that the jury can consider. So does this mean that the prosecution didn't do a good job, and as a result, the judge is saying we're going to include this lesser crime? I think that that's reading a little bit too much into it. I will say, as an aside, having watched the trial, I do think that the prosecution was largely out-lawyered by the defense. That doesn't mean that the prosecution wins. It means that I think the defense did an extraordinary job in terms of lawyering, of really using that burden of proof in Massachusetts to its benefit, and really forcing the prosecution to prove that when it comes to criminal culpability, that Lindsay Clancy either understood the wrongfulness of what she was doing or that she was able to comport her behavior within the boundaries of the law. That's the whole ballgame when it comes to whether or not she's going to be criminally culpable. That's the threshold. Then we get to the lesser included offenses, and frankly, all the offenses, as we saw from the graphic, first degree, second degree, and manslaughter.
And was that always the plan, to have those lesser charges?
I don't know that that was always the plan. It's certainly not what both sides agreed to. So I don't think that was the plan from the outset.
Okay.
But I do think it's worth saying this is not a flashing sign the prosecution's going to lose or it's all over for the prosecution. It's not hugely unusual for this to happen. Obviously, I don't think the prosecution wanted this.
The jury has to make the decision as to whether Clancy was suffering from a mental disease or defect at the time of the killings. What will they be looking at specifically? How will they make this determination? Because we've obviously heard time and time again on the defense the fact that she did seek medical treatment, that she was asking and pleading for help. But what specifically does this jury need to keep in mind when making this determination?
I think the way you ask this question is so important because there is no question that she was suffering from severe mental illness. And the prosecution admitted this, as they should. You don't want to get in front of the jury and say she was fine when there's all this evidence of her seeking mental health and help. So what you're looking at, I think, for the jury in terms of that standard that you laid out is you're looking at the testimony by the psychologists and psychiatrists. And what the prosecution really wants the jury to focus on is her planning ahead of time, saying to her husband, you should leave, you should go pick up takeout, you should go to the pharmacy. The prosecution wants to focus the jury on that. And again, they're experts who said she was ill, but not to the level necessary to say not criminally culpable.
Yeah, Jessica, as you were speaking, there was a graphic that showed the number of medications that she was on at one point and prescribed, I guess, over the course of her seeking help. We will be watching. Jessica Levinson, thank you for helping us understand it all.